Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. So Tuesday night, some people were shocked. I was surprised by what ended up happening. And so I thought it would be good to check in with Bruce Fisher, Senior Advisor at Strategy Corp, an author, a speechwriter for Joe Biden back a couple decades ago, and someone who is a real follower of what's going on in politics. Bruce, you and I got it wrong. Why?
All the data analytics people are in sackcloth and ashes, trying to figure out how they miscalculated. And frankly, because the polls were so tight, so many people who are statisticians started looking at other data, demographic data, especially looking at voter registration data. And the error that we all made was to assume that behavior in the voting booth was going to be determined by gender, ethnic status, income level, et cetera. And what happened was that the messaging universe ruled, as it usually does in politics. So unlikely behavior from unlikely segments of the voting population occurred. Women voted in majority for Trump. An enormous increase in the support for Trump this is in the Rust Belt states, but also in places like Texas, from Latino voters, from Hispanic voters. Everybody who follows these numbers and follows these patterns just expected that women would act in 2024 as they had in 2022, which was in the after the Supreme Court decision against maintaining Roe v. Wade, which is the 60 years about access to reproductive freedom. Women everywhere dominated in coming out in support of these statewide referendum on abortion rights. Well, they didn't in 2024. They didn't in the Rust Belt. And so what happened? Well, Latino voters did something that they hadn't done before, which is they voted Republican. Black men voted in large numbers for the Republican. And overall, if you stand back from this, what happened was that Kamala Harris had two problems. Number one, she's an elite-looking person from San Francisco who didn't sell well in the Rust Belt. She underperformed where working-class Joe Biden performed well in 2020. And her second problem is that she was blamed for both the inflation that is now done and for the perception of an immigration crisis. So immigration, inflation, and identity, the three I's of politics in 2024. That's what won it for Donald Trump, his relentless focus on immigration. You know, you asked me, Brian, the other night, on election night, why is Donald Trump focused on brown people? Why is he doing that? And the answer is because that's been the Republican formula for decades. Focus on the other, focus on making sure that the resentments and the anxieties of white, especially displaced, economically distressed white people are channeled. That's what happened. It worked.
Sounds like it's back to your book, and it's a repeat of exactly the same issues.
Plus ça change, plus c'est la même chose, right? It's a pattern that's been established in the Rust Belt. I expect that if Trump's economic policies go into play, where he enforces tariff rules, things are not going to go well in the Rust Belt. Strangely enough, all the investments that have been going on in the Rust Belt, in the so-called red areas, to bring back manufacturing, are just now beginning to gain traction. Okay, so Joe Biden is going to have left this policy framework that's going to be very positive, and Donald Trump is going to come along, at first benefit from it, and then try to dismantle it. Crazy stuff.
Why did black men increase their vote with Trump?
Machismo. I don't I don't pretend to have a deep understanding, but I talked to the former mayor, the first Black mayor of a major American city, in some detail the other night. Close friend of mine, we'd written and presented together for many years. And he said, the young brothers are just, enamored of the idea of the strong man. They just like it. I talked to a fellow who has some family insight into the Puerto Rican community, and said it's notwithstanding the disdain that Trump exhibited for Puerto Rico, there is a cultural tendency to like the man on horseback. So, sometimes one needs to be more of a psychologist and an anthropologist than a bean counter. And I made the error of being a bean counter the other day. So, mea culpa. But a lot of us got it really wrong. We never imagined that this time, because of the abortion issue, because of the focused and relentless misogyny of the Trump candidacy, we never imagined that women would stay home in the numbers that they did, and that those who came out would vote for Trump. So you have to ask why. What was it motivating American women, especially in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, to do so differently in 2024 what they had done in the midterm elections in 2022, which was resoundingly for these democratic issues? And the answer seems to be that the anxiety about inflation, which, as we know, is over. The inflation is gone now. It's back down to historic levels. And the anxiety about the alleged catastrophe of illegal immigration, which is just, it's an invention. And that leads us to understand something new. The media universe that exists today is not the media universe of our formative years. If I may speculate that you're older than 30. We used to have a shared basis of information. We don't have a shared basis of information right now. The astonishing prevalence of Fox News viewership, the astonishing prevalence of these bot-driven message devices is on display right now. You have people living in Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, elsewhere. Household incomes are up. Unemployment is down. Jobs are more plentiful. Wages are up. This is the best economy that the United States has seen in generations. The cover of the Economist magazine has this sort of rocket ship with a US dollar on it, saying the greatest economy ever. That's the Biden economy, but that's the reality. But folks have been convinced by the media universe in which they live that the economy sucks, that there's a crisis.
Well, isn't there some line about if you say something over and over and over again, eventually people will believe it? And isn't that what Donald Trump has been doing? He's been telling people that the economy sucks, that we're in a garbage economy in the United States.
Yes, and that everything was better under him. People point to the fact that inflation is up. And I said, wait. Inflation has been coming down since the end of the winter, right? It was an international phenomenon. It didn't get as bad in the United States as it got in Europe and elsewhere in the world, but it certainly has been coming down. It's like 2.5% right now, which is exactly what the United States Federal Reserve Board targets, right? Interest rates have been cut. Lots of us thought that the interest rate cuts of September would have an immediate effect. And the answer is they have had an immediate effect, but not a psychological effect. The lingering experience, I believe, especially in the Rust Belt, the lingering traumatic displacement of deindustrialization that happened in the 80s was reinforced during Barack Obama's tenure, shortly after his resolution of the financial crisis of 2008. And not to get too deeply into the weeds here, but we tracked as we were watching on election night, we tracked the counties and the votes where Obama had done well in 2008 and 2012, where Trump had turned things around for himself in 2016. And this looked like a repeat of the 2016 election. And what was that election? It was the rejection of an elite sounding woman in Hillary Clinton, who wasn't connecting with the experience of economic anxiety of women and men in the Rust Belt. That's what happened again. So all the talk about misogyny and racism, you know what? I beg to differ. I beg to differ. It is so consistent across other places than the Rust Belt. When you look at the exit polling data, you know, there are lots of women who got elected. Okay, there are lots of Democrats who got elected. In a city in which I served as a public official, a friend of mine is now the district attorney, a Democratic district attorney. He won by 20 percentage points on the night that Kamala Harris was only winning by 8 or 9 in that area. So it's not it's not the party label. Sometimes it's the messenger. And one speculates, could it have been a better outcome had the Democratic mayor of the state of Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer, run? And the answer is probably. A Michigan female executive running for president. I mean, who knows how this is counterfactual speculation. Could she have done better than Kamala Harris, the lawyer from San Francisco? You got to remember something. There's something kind of emotional about San Francisco in the minds of most U.S. voters. Either they think it's a place of liberation and happiness and fun, or they think of it as this hellhole of wokeness and homelessness and sneering tech billionaire bros. San Francisco is an iconic problem. And I don't think San Francisco Harris or San Francisco Nancy Pelosi or California politician general will be digestible in places that are not as sophisticated, prosperous, shiny, colorful. So
Gavin Newsom wouldn't have been a better choice. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back in just 2 minutes with Bruce Fisher talking about a postmortem on the U.S. election. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I'm chatting tonight with Bruce Fisher. He's a senior advisor at Strategy Corp. He's an author of a book, Where the Streets Are Paved with Rust, Essays from America's Broken Heartland, 2018, which I presume was written after the 2016 election, and why Donald Trump won and why the Democrats did so poorly in the Rust Belt, which is clearly one of the issues that we're talking about in regards to what happened on Tuesday night in the election. Bruce, I got to ask you, Long Island went Trump, just outside of Manhattan. And most people, I think, would have thought of New York as an incredibly democratic state. They didn't call it for the longest time because other than, the city of New York, the vast majority of the balance of New York State voted for Trump.
But that's forgive me, that's the geography, that's the political geography of New York. It's like the political geography of Pennsylvania. As James Carville famously quipped in 1992, between Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, you have Alabama. So out on Long Island, the land of the Great Gatsbys, the land of the Hamptons, the land of suburbia, that's been behaviorally Republican for a generation, 2 generations. So it's inside New York City, which is 8.5 million of the 20 million people who live in the state of New York, and in the upstate cities of Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, Albany, Binghamton. Those are the blue spots, and the rest of the state is either suburban or pretty much empty farmland. So it's very red, and that's the pattern in the state of Illinois. Illinois votes overwhelmingly Democratic in the Chicago area and in a couple of small cities. The rest of the state is as red as a ruby. That's how it is in the state of Wisconsin. That's how it is in the state of Michigan. Outside of Detroit and Michigan, you have the country. Outside of the city of Milwaukee, except for the sapphire blue of Madison, Wisconsin, which is where the university center is and the capital is. That is a red state. So that rural-urban divide is a feature of the landscape in the United States.
I saw an interesting map that suggested that Kamala Harris did not do better than Biden in any county in all of the United States, not in one county, urban or rural. And then another interesting map that said that Trump did equal to what he achieved or better than what he achieved in the vast majority of rural counties in the United States.
So as we were talking on Tuesday, when I was sitting there with my spreadsheets, okay, what we expected, what every analyst expected, what the number crunchers expected was that Trump would not grow his base, beyond a tiny increment. So did he perform to plan? Absolutely, he performed to plan, right? And I remember saying to you, he didn't grow. She's been growing hers. Harris was growing hers. Harris was reaching out beyond the traditional boundaries. And we expected this enormous surge of female voters. We saw an enormous surge of female registrants in places like Pennsylvania. I tracked them. There were hundreds of thousands of new female registrants, okay, in exactly the places where the advertising people would say, yeah, you got the right education level, you got the right demographic characteristics of income, household ownership of automobiles, all those indices of kind of liberal orientation, small L liberal orientation, okay? And what do? Well, those who bothered to come out voted for Trump. Like, holy cow. Didn't see that coming. Nobody saw that coming. In fact, by midday of election day, the Trump campaign was melting down. They were having fits of anxiety. They were having a crisis. By midday in the Harris campaign, they were getting ready to hold high wassail. They were going out, buying more champagne for the night. But by the end of the day, by about 5 o'clock, it became evident when the exit polling came in that something had gone quite not to plan. And what had gone not quite to plan was that women were voting for Trump. Who knew? Who knew that a guy who's been adjudicated as a sexual offender, who had been running a campaign of misogyny, would nevertheless be able to communicate, but to attach to the anxiety that people have over inflation and immigration. Didn't know that it was that potent, more potent than reproductive rights, more potent than women's rights, more potent than messaging about we're going to let the worst of the macho characteristics of these tough guys, Joe Rogan and who is this other cat on cable television, Tucker Carlson and all this stuff. We're going to let that rule here. And we're going to ignore the evidence of the numbers in our daily lives and say that the economy is in crisis. Like,
small sample size, but I spoke with a handful of females, all well-educated, all, good incomes. And every single one of them made a comment that they could not imagine Kamala Harris sitting across the table from Putin or Xi, or standing up to Iran. It was almost
which
as if
is bizarre.
They wanted a strong man too.
Which is part of this. And the person who has actually been a prosecutor, who stood across the table from Donald Trump, the person who's been a prosecutor who put people in jail, the person who was the tough, on her feet interlocutor in a trial situation where you got to work without a script, who has actually done it. Somehow women were not able to understand that this is the person who is probably better equipped to stand toe to toe with these thugs because she's dealt with thugs. But, you know, if educated women are telling you this, that's an indication of some insight, gives us some insight into how it could be possible for women to overlook everything else and to choose this guy. Look, the only demographic that Harris rose in, she lost Hispanics overall, including women. She lost a great deal of the Black community, especially the younger males. Okay. The only group that she did better with was the group that you were micro-sampling, which is educated women, right? We thought that the independents were going to break her way. They were breaking her way in the polling in the last couple of days. But these two issues of economic anxiety, especially about inflation, anger about inflation, which is what drove Joe Biden's favorability numbers down into the basement, and this anxiety about immigration, which Donald Trump stoked throughout his campaign, are what were the decisive issues. Look, it is arguable that even before Harris became a candidate, the campaign was over. It was over on that day that Donald Trump convinced Republicans in the United States Senate to flush, to end, to take off the table the bill that they had negotiated, that they had, the Immigration Solution Act. He said, I want to preserve that issue for the general election. And the Republicans in the United States Senate, even the author of that bill, the co-author of that bill, which would have resolved a lot of the immigration issues, put more immigration officers on the southern border of the United States of Mexico, dealt with some of the thorniest issues. Once the Republicans coalesced around making that the issue, preserving that issue, not solving the government problem so that they could have a political wedge, perhaps that was the day when this campaign was over.
I heard Van Jones, a commentator, a Democratic commentator on CNN, say that actually the Republicans and the Trump campaign did a better job with new media, and that they didn't realize the power of podcasters.
They were brilliant at communicating to their audience. Look at the numbers. Look at the numbers of where Trump performed in the rural areas. Right. The surprise was that he communicated on these two issues, inflation and immigration, as well as they did. Plus the general problem of the underperformance, the under participation, the non-turnout of middle-class women.
How are people like you, statisticians, pollsters, going to change?
We have to listen to the anthropologists and the political scientists and the, dare I say it, the political scientists. I don't like political science because there are those of us who've done politics, those of us who are actively involved in it, and then there are those people in the ivory towers who talk about it. You know, I don't talk about it. I do it. I advise on it. I write the speeches. You know, that's me. Like, figure out how to communicate. Listen to people. Listen to folks. You know, do the research. See where the correlations are. But the great change is exactly as you talked about. The media universe has so radically changed. The manner in which people get their information has so radically changed. Harris was indeed adept, but they didn't motivate their folks. They didn't motivate their folks. And I think everybody was surprised. It's not that the Trump people are sitting there saying, haha, our plan worked. They're as surprised as anybody. They didn't know that they were going to get this buy-in, right? They had guys up there on the stage in Madison Square Garden insulting Puerto Rico. I mean,
and they still got Hispanics. They still got people from Puerto Rico.
Yeah. Holy cow. How'd you do that? I think that the potency of the immigration issue in the United States is the potency of the immigration issue in Western Europe. I mean, there is a sense of being besieged by unwanted strangers.
Well, I got to tell you, I think it's going to be a major issue in Canada because I think that if there is even a threat of mass deportations in the United States, those people, those immigrants, don't want to go back to where they came from, and so I think
No,
they're going to come across the border into Canada, and people have talked about this, but only to a small degree, and so I think it's something that we in Canada have to pay attention to real quick, and make sure that we have a strategy. Otherwise, number
North
one, we'll
America's
be
issue. Yeah.
economically impacted negatively, but then also number two, politically, it's going to become
Yes.
a big issue. Bruce, thank you so much, both for our review before election day, as well as our postmortem afterwards. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Ryan.
We're going to take a break, and I'm going to come back with a lawyer, Douglas Elliott, a very prominent lawyer who's got an interesting view on what happened in the election, as well as his disappointment with the justice system in the United States, and his concern that what this proves is that our belief that no one was above the law actually is not something we can believe anymore. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes with another commentator post-mortem on the U.S. election. Stay with us. Thanks very much, Bruce.
You.